Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into one of the most suspenseful, intensely debated, and honestly, just deeply emotional narratives in all of ancient literature. We're talking about the story of Abraham and his son Isaac from the book of Genesis. And look, this isn't just some dry historical or religious text. It's an absolute masterclass in narrative tension. So, let's unpack this ultimate test of faith together.
To really grasp the incredibly high stakes here, we have to start with this completely shocking command. God speaks to Abraham and says, "Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering." Just pause for a second and let the literal weight of those words sink in. Thine only son, whom thou lovest. The text goes out of its way to emphasize Abraham's deep emotional attachment right before dropping this absolutely devastating instruction.
So, you kind of have to ask yourself, how does a patriarch face such an impossible paradox? I mean, really consider the immense literary and emotional weight of this exact moment. Because to truly understand why this is so earth-shattering, we can't just look at this single command in a vacuum. We actually have to step back and look at the broader context of Abraham's life to see exactly what led to this defining test.
Okay, Section 1, the long-awaited heir.
You see Abraham's story? It's definitely not a quick sprint. It's a grueling marathon of waiting. Think about the sheer scale of time involved here. Abraham leaves Haran at age 75 based on this incredible promise that God's going to make a great nation out of him. And then years pass. At 86, he has a son named Ishmael with Hagar, but God explicitly steps in and says, no, the core covenant isn't going to be established through Ishmael, it has to be through a son born to his wife Sarah. So he waits even longer. And finally, at age 100, Isaac is born. The guy endured a grueling, decades-long wait for this one specific promised son.
100 years old. That's how old Abraham was when Isaac was miraculously born. Sarah was 90. To put that into perspective, they were decades past any standard retirement age. Sarah literally laughed at the prospect when she heard it. Isaac was the impossible child, right? The literal physical embodiment of a lifelong promise. He was completely, entirely irreplaceable.
And that right there brings us to the heart of the narrative paradox we're dealing with. On one hand, you have God's direct promise from Genesis 21, "In Isaac shall thy seed be called." Basically, Isaac is the guaranteed future. But on the other hand, you have this new, immediate test, offer him there for a burnt offering. It is a massive, jarring contradiction. I mean, how can the seed multiply through Isaac if Isaac is sacrificed? This crazy tension is the core engine driving the entire story.
Which brings us to Section 2, Journey to Mount Moriah.
So with that impossible paradox hanging in the air, Abraham gets the command. And you know what? He doesn't argue. He doesn't try to negotiate like he did earlier for the city of Sodom. He just gets up early, saddles his donkey, chops the wood, and starts the agonizing trek. And it takes 3 days. Think about the suspense pacing here. 3 days of traveling with the wood, the fire, the knife, and the son he's just been told to kill. 3 full days of complete narrative silence about what is going on inside Abraham's head. He leaves his servants behind, takes only Isaac, and tells them, "I and the lad will go yonder and worship, and come again to you." As they're walking together, Isaac breaks the silence with what has to be the most heartbreaking question. He points out the obvious to his dad. He says, "Behold the fire on the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" It's just a moment of pure, devastating, dramatic irony. Isaac sees all the elements for the sacrifice, but he has absolutely no clue that he's the intended victim. And Abraham's response is immediate, super carefully chosen, and heavy with tension. He says, "My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering." Now, is this a statement of profound prophetic faith, a gentle evasion to protect his kid, or just a really desperate hope? The text actually doesn't say, but they just keep walking, both of them together.
All right, Section 3, the binding of Isaac.
They finally arrive at the mountain. And guys, notice how the text radically slows down here. It methodically describes every deliberate, agonizing action. Step 1, he builds an altar. Step 2, he lays the wood in order. Step 3, he binds Isaac his son and lays him on the altar upon the wood. And step 4, Abraham stretches out his hand and grabs the knife to slay his son. The pacing is incredibly deliberate. It literally draws out the suspense until the absolute last possible fraction of a second.
But then, right as the knife is raised, a sudden dramatic intervention shatters the whole scene. The angel of the Lord calls out from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." And Abraham answers, "Here am I." The angel commands, "Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me."
Just like that, the test is abruptly over. This impossible paradox gets resolved not by an act of violence, but by a declaration of obedience.
And that leads us to Section 4, the Ram and the Covenant.
So the immediate crisis is averted, right? But the story doesn't just end with a sigh of relief. We move right into the aftermath of this ultimate test. Abraham looks up, and wouldn't you know it, right there behind him is a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. The substitute sacrifice is perfectly provided. Abraham takes the ram and offers it up instead of his son. The tension completely releases here as the prophecy Abraham unknowingly made on the hike up the mountain actually becomes reality.
Because of this wild turn of events, Abraham gives the location a highly specific name. He calls it Jehovah Jireh, which translates to, "In the mount of the Lord it shall be seen." It ties directly back to what he told Isaac earlier about God providing. The location itself basically becomes this permanent memorial to the exact intersection of an impossible demand and ultimate provision.
Then the angel of the Lord calls out a second time. Because Abraham didn't withhold his only son, God pronounces these massive, overarching blessings. The covenant is powerfully reaffirmed. God promises to multiply Abraham's seed as the stars of the heaven and the sand on the seashore. His seed is going to possess the gate of his enemies. And crucially, in his seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. It's an incredible paradox. Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his future is exactly what ultimately secured it permanently.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought to chew on. The binding of Isaac is an absolute cornerstone of literary and religious history. In an ancient world where child sacrifice to local deities was totally common, this story ends with a radical twist, a God who provides the substitute himself. When a text pits the ultimate promise against the ultimate test, what does it truly reveal about the nature of faith and obedience? It is a question that has captivated scholars, philosophers, and readers for millennia, and honestly, the echoes of this tension are still felt today. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you in the next explainer.